who also helped us with the book and was tremendous. She's an associate distinguished professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies and in the practice in psychology in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. She also is a dance therapist. She is a leader in this area, especially in terms of creative arts, to assist in the healing from trauma. She has done lots of international training through her Serlin Institute of Healing Arts. She is the past president of the San Francisco Psychological Association. She's a fellow of the American Psychological Association, a past president and recipient of the Rollo May Award of the Division of Humanistic Psychology. She has edited several books, numerous articles and chapters and magazine pieces on trauma, psychotherapy, creativity, and human thriving. And we got to, Angelique, we have the greatest panel here in terms of talking about the pandemic and what practitioners did along the way.
I agree. And thank you for those wonderful introductions. I'm over here kind of just blown away by all of it. You guys are amazing. Welcome to you both and welcome our audience. So I guess we'll just jump in with these questions. I'd like to hear from all three of you on our list of questions, but we'll start with Dr. Figley. Why did you write and edit this book about pandemic social workers, psychologists, nurses, and other practitioners during the pandemic?
Well, first of all, I was smart enough to get co-authors and co-editors to help me out. It was, as you say, it was an extraordinary variety. Social workers, psychologists, nurses, very, very different in terms of standards of care, what they specifically do, the expectations they have in each other, gender relations, that sort of thing. But it was fun in the beginning in particular, because we were doing something that no one else had ever done. So what we wanted when we decided that we have to write a book, we have to produce a book from this, we thought about all of the variety of groups and people that we have worked with along the way. And we had organized it into a group. In other words, each of the discussion groups were created associated with particular populations. So we had that already, but it was an extraordinarily challenging thing to do with so many people, with so many different interests, and even in terms of disciplines, more than just psychologists. Colleagues, what do you think?
Yeah, I certainly would agree. We started out, there were almost 100 of us who answered Dr. Figley's call. I said, do you want to help? What are we going to do during this pandemic? Everything had shut down, something unprecedented. And we were all in our homes, not able to go out, not able to buy groceries unless we ordered them. I remember, one of my first images where the television of all these little red balls that are running around that represented the coronavirus. And I kept looking in my house, are they here? Can I see them? Are they, it was the unknown for me particularly. And I knew Charles and I knew Ilene, of course, from other work that we had done together. And I thought, oh, this sounds like a group I'd like to be stuck on a coronavirus unknown with, to see if we can figure out not only to help ourselves, but to help other people, other mental health professionals who were going through the same thing. We had never really used Zoom before. And so we all had to learn the technology. Some of us learned it better than others because we had And we had people of all ages who joined us. And thank goodness for our younger people, because they were the technologically sophisticated people. They picked it up right away and really helped us along the way with it. And so we had to be innovative. And for me, I think I'm a builder. I'm a doer of new things. And so being innovative was very exciting. And we'll talk maybe a little later about some of the innovative kinds of things that we've been able to do all together. But that was the excitement for me. Now, we didn't intend to write a book initially, as Dr. Figley said. We intended to just survive. We were, that was kind of, we got to get through this. But once we began to look at the literature, we realized there was almost nothing about what providers did during the 1918 flu, nor was there very much about all the different, they weren't pandemics particularly, but like the swine flu and some of the other disasters that were going on. There was no literature. And as academics, we're writers. And we said, we can't let this go by without documenting what we're doing. And I have to give Dr. Figley credit for that, because he was pushing all of us. We're doing, and he's saying, we got to document it. We got to document it. And so we had the materials to be able to start pulling it together once we realized what we're doing is important, it's new, and it's got legs. We've got to document it. And that's how it happened, at least how I remember it happening. I don't know, Ilene, if your memory is similar.
Well, I think I'm going to build on what Lenore said. Thank you. There are some themes that I think we will be tracking throughout this conversation. And one of them is isolation versus collaboration. And I think one of the things I felt, and many of us felt at Zoom, was the being cooped up, isolation, fear of the unknown, all those things. And like Lenore, I'm also a doer. And one of the things, because we're going to be talking about among those things that were not written previously, we did a part of the book is about the Spanish flu, the epidemic. There weren't any records. Mostly there weren't records about the psychological impact. And then helping as we began to understand that pandemics may be inevitable. This may be only one of others that may be coming. We need to know, what do we do? How do we mobilize? So as psychologists, I think that many of us help ourselves by helping others. And so like many, I jumped in when I saw Dr. Figley's call to, it felt good to be with other people. I also had no idea of a book. I just knew that I really enjoyed, and the people on the screen, I'm going to be talking about the kind of the interpersonal impact of it. We met wonderful people, volunteers, cross-cultural, cross-generation. So the regular meetings that we had, I think gave me and many of us stability, because part of COVID is that your regular schedule's gone, your work schedule, your colleagues, a lot of the familiar disappears. We use the phrase, your world is upside down. And some people were really more isolated even than we are. So the regularity of our meetings, anyway, it became in some ways a support group for us. And I don't want to minimize how important the connection among all of us. Many of us became good friends. Mm-hmm. And I think that helped us through the pandemic as we were struggling with, and how do we help others? And the other thing I think that we're going to track that was remarkable about this, I think it's the first time that therapists, as we know, have documented sort of subjective stories about, we're in it with you too. How does that change the way we practice? Because we were fielding lots of questions from colleagues about, what do I do? And they see my living room or my unmade bed, and with the COVID and all kinds of new things. So I think the regularity of our meetings. And then finally, I think everybody wants to have an outcome. And there is something about documenting this book. And many of us are at the legacy stages of our lives, which is really, we want to leave something for others and not just kind of muddle through ourselves, learn what we did, but really document challenges faced, lessons learned for the people we hope will benefit from this work.
Angelique, you want to ask us another question?
I mean, I'm over here just fascinated, but, I think we look at, you've got certain sectors and certain people within the world that are, like, okay, well, we're past this. Why now? Why put out a book like this now? So I would like to ask, why is this book important? Why do you feel like it's important in this, obviously to document, but in addition, why is it important now in this space and time?
I'm going to jump in unless you guys jump in first.
Jump, Charles, jump.
All right. Well, mine is relatively straightforward. I think this book is important because it focuses on the practitioner, pandemic practitioner. There's been, of course, lots and lots of attention toward those people who died, first and foremost, those who have, chronic conditions. It's terrible, and especially, the older they are, or even the younger they are. But I think for me, that particular question really is associated with something that we know very little about, really, and that's the practitioners in all of the fields, including, but certainly not limited to psychology. What do you guys think?
Oh, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. For me, I think the most important thing was that we tried new things that we might not have been able to do if it weren't such an emergency going on, and they worked. Number one was we were able to see patients as practitioners outside of our offices, outside of the formal setting. As Ilene was saying, we could see them over Zoom, and we had to learn how to do that because we had resisted doing it for a long time. And now all of a sudden we had no choice. And guess what? A lot of people found they liked it. Now, some people hated it and still don't like it, but many more found that not having to get up in the morning and go out and spend time in traffic or other kinds of things to get to your office actually was liberating in many ways. So I think that was important to document that. The second for me was we tried something new called, I called them round tables. We took our group working with intimate partner violence, and we built a Facebook page and several other social media pages. We were Instagram, we were Twitter, or tweeting, or all kinds of things that my younger colleagues were able to do. And we started reaching people internationally. One day we had a wonderful social worker in Uganda, Dr. Harriet Adan, who just jumped on the Facebook page that was simultaneous to our Zoom, and we got her right into the whole panel discussion. So we were instantaneously dealing with everything that was happening at the moment. And normally in mental health work, we write articles. It takes 9 months to publish them. We do research studies. We're very careful. Here we had to jump in and do what we had to do, and it worked. So I'm not saying that's the only way practitioners should work, but it's showing us we have resources that we can use in different ways, and we had to document that.
And Angelique, I think you're muted. I don't know if
No,
you're.
I'm sorry. I was waiting. I didn't know if you wanted to take that question as
Yeah,
well.
I will say thank you. That and to add to that, I'll say two things. One is that, we're going to talk sort of about the world as we see it now. But at that time, I was beginning to get a sense that this was not the end of the kind of trauma we were going to be seeing. And I had been working internationally and working in China and Turkey and India, and I'll talk about that, but seeing not just COVID, but also earthquakes, a lot with immigrants, refugees. I'd been working in Jordan with refugees. So looking globally, my feeling was we're all going to have to, mental health people, to be prepared with waves of trauma. And I hate to say it, but I'm just holding my breath that the world doesn't get worse, but that we need to be prepared. And that's really what motivated me to look at what's training, what are we learning from this, how can we help others learn and get prepared to deal with waves of trauma. So as far as the international, I have a training institute in China. And so they use Zoom, and we had already been working with they on their phones. So we'd been working with people, a lot of them kind of unique challenges that we don't see here that I think are important for us to know about, like whole families together in one room. At that point, I contacted Lenore, Dr. Walker, and asked her to talk about domestic violence because that was spiking. So I was seeing kind of collateral damage from the COVID in lots of other parts of the world. One of our groups deals with psychologist kind of self-care, and she had been contacted by a psychoanalyst from India. And I don't know if you can remember, but there was a spike where the COVID was terrible in India. I remember being on a Zoom call with these Indian colleagues where one said, sorry, I don't feel well, got off the call. She had COVID. While she was on the phone, her brother was sent to the hospital. He then died. So we were experiencing in our midst COVID and experiencing it all over the world. So again, that was something unique about this and something that I was thinking about as one of the outcomes. This, people were saying, we see now we're a global world. We're all interconnected. We need to learn from each other. We need to learn what works in different cultures. Zoom has been an incredible doorway into lots of other cultures. And I think we're continuing to reach around the world and share what we're learning.
Love that. Thank you. And I think about these things a lot, just in terms of who cares for the caretakers and the help, who helps the helpers. And I think that the pandemic definitely brought those things out. It was a remarkable, very unprecedented time, as it seems was commonly the common phrasing. How did practitioners manage during these times?
Well, I'll just jump in and say just one thing, because I'm still dealing with it, actually. I've had the same office in the city. By the city, I don't mean New York. I mean San Francisco, for 35 years. Same colleagues. We built a little community, had lunch with the same person every Tuesday for 35 years at this. So the stability, the things on the wall, everything that gave a sense of grounding, had to close it, as did many, had to close our offices. And that throws one as a practitioner into something unknown, which is working from home, negotiating domestic schedules, privacy issues, all that kind of stuff. So how do we deal with it? From the beginning, there were logistical changes that really made us work in different ways. I'm still grieving the loss of my office, and a lot of the things that I used to have are books around me. It's a different stage of life, and I think many of us are working differently. But one of the things that I've learned over and over again is that we're not alone. We need to support each other. Others are going through the same thing, giving each other tips on what do you do with all your books and stuff. And so again, it's the connection, the human connection, that for me made all the difference.
For me, it's a little bit different. I had already decided to retire from academia prior to the pandemic. And the pandemic kind of brought me out of retirement. So I sort of failed at retirement. It made it much easier. A lot of my work in independent practice is doing evaluations of people who have experienced trauma, and then preparing reports for testimony in court cases. And all of a sudden, the courts all shut down. And so you could not go into the jail, shut down, the prison shut down, but Zoom was there. And so I was able to do evaluations on Zoom, which I never would have been able to have done before. They weren't as good, I don't think, as when I saw people in person, but they were good enough for the work that had to be done. So it was learning to do them in a new way, and I stayed working. I'm just now deciding, yes, I'm closing my office this time, I'm going to really do it. Although Dr. Figley keeps trying to drag me out of my retirement to do more work together. I won't stop working, of course, but I want to write mystery novels. I want to write fiction, not and be a little bit more creative and use some of my science and some of my creativity. So in this stage of my life, I'm sort of moving into different directions. And I see a number of my cohorts who are in a similar age bracket, who are in that same position. So we hung on longer than we thought we would, and enjoyed it. And I think I did some good work.
Yes, you did, for sure. Well, let me just talk a little bit about this. In answering this question, I think about my students that I've had, and most of them, we were locked down as well. Tulane was, like other universities. And to be able to work with students who are not sitting at home more often than not, they're in pandemics, and more often than not, they're absolutely critical for the functioning of an agency. So we heard a lot about that, and about people getting sick, and people dying, and family members. We talked about this already. This was real. Dying is happening, and it was sobering, as a matter of fact. And the work, quote unquote, that we were doing, we felt it was important work, but we weren't really sure. We didn't know what the outcome was. Mm-hmm. As you know, there were so many variations and changes and shifts, and not just politically, but just in terms of to keep one safe, the family safe. So it was, in many ways, we did this under the conditions that were not obviously ideal. And in many ways, it reminded me of combat. I know it's kind of a far cry, given the circumstances of life and death. But in many ways, people felt like this was it, like things were happening and they weren't sure. I saw it on people's faces. I've spoken with students, again, among the students in particular, there was real fear. There were tears, but not those that you would think of. It was tears of determination to get it right and to help those people that they were learning to work with as students. So it was, I think it was a very leveling period of time. And my wife, Kathy, talks frequently about how she knows that I've either been, she can tell when trauma comes over me and what I have been doing. And it was challenging. It was challenging for both of us. And I don't know if I'm still over it yet. I'm looking forward actually to reading our book. I've seen little pieces of it as we were editing it along the way. But I would look to our book in many ways of enabling me to heal more thoroughly than I have so far in terms of the challenges of the pandemic.
That is a heavy point at the end, and just understanding that you as a provider and you as an educator need to heal and still need to heal. Yes. Which leads me to my next question. how can our country truly make the fundamental changes needed in the delivery of mental health services? What do you feel like is needed based on everything that we now know?
Bring it up and out in the open. Mental illness and mental health are things that people typically have not talked about in the past. I know I'm old enough. We're all this, the three editors know this for personal experiences here. It is, it's still the responsibility of those of us who can help other people to encourage them to get help. But it's very frustrating being a practitioner, because on the one hand, you do know and should know for at least for your clients' purpose of helping them, what's going on and what are the mental health disasters that are happening all around us. We need to know that, and we have known that. But at the same time, when you have such changes that are happening, natural disasters as well as changes in policy and parties and various ridiculous idiots that end up being elected to lead us. Hello, my God, what choices. That's a conundrum at the very least. Colleagues, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of the excitements for me during that period was sort of bringing me back to my beginnings in mental health, when the independent practitioner really had support and resources to deliver mental health services to different people and different groups independently, rather than be forced into groups or into corporate models. And I fear that that is still on the fringe. I think as mental health associations and practitioners and educators, we're fighting against the corporatization of delivering mental health services. We can deliver them to more people, but I'm not sure the quality is there. And so during the pandemic, we supported the independent practitioner, the person who sat in their home behind the screen, and helped them with the resources inside, developing the internal resources. We couldn't always give them money or other kinds of things, although our associations did lobby and argue so that we were able to get reimbursed for the work that we were doing in ways that had been troublesome before. And so I like the Renaissance going back, I think of it, to that independent practice means of delivering those services, being trained well enough and having the support. And I really hope that as students insist upon that, and it's easy to jump into the corporations who are offering a lot of money to start up practices, but it's much better to do it on your own. And that's what is in this book. We're really showing people in the different areas how to do that on their own and sustain it. With, of course, as Ilene is saying, with collaboration with other people, but not waiting for somebody else to do that for you, to be able to jump on the internet and find it yourself when you need it.
And I will say something that really does not need to be said, and then I'll go on, which is it became so obvious very quickly to not just us, but everyone, the inequities in the system. And, we've documented, it shows up in a number of chapters, the rates of dying, one group versus another, access to healthcare, one group for another. So, and that became clear, I think, to all of us in this country. What to do about it. I think one thing I learned is when you're overwhelmed with trauma, with challenges, there's a song that talks about planting a seed. And really that's all you can do in your own domain. What can you do to be helpful and hope it has ripple effects? And so you do what you can. And I can't control the whole system, but I can try via this book, via the outreach I do, via the people in my world, via my collaborations to do what I can and let go of the expectations that I can change the whole healthcare system, because we're not going to do it. But what I can do, and what I realized, and again, building on some of the themes that we've been talking about, the interdisciplinary and the intergenerational and the need for it. So what's a bit of a interesting mix here is the, as Dr. Walker's been talking, the role of technology actually cuts both ways. And people are talking about greater access and it helps. We're also seeing a lot of artificial intelligence, mental health through Amazon. We have no control over quality, over human relationships. We don't know what's going to happen with technology and all these new waves, but the access it gives. So I'll just talk a little bit about my particular chapter. I think one of the things, that's chapter 8, which is the arts and somatic. I firmly believed as a dance therapist that trauma is in the body, not necessarily verbal, and especially working cross-culturally, you can't use words. You really can't use our Western kind of individualistic model. So how do you reach other cultures and how do you work? So there were members of our subgroup, like NeuroArts, is something from Johns Hopkins, who is now combining arts and science to look at healing and making that available on large scales across populations, to create toolkits, to create healing at the bedside. Dr. Figley knows the University of Florida has an arts medicine department, and they were part of us. So we used artists. We had dancers working with children in Africa through Zoom. And I remember a story about an African man who was telling us about in his village, when somebody's crying, let's say under a tree, they don't try to cure him. The other villagers go up and stand and cry with him. And then eventually the crying turns happier and happier until you build resilience, until everybody's dancing and singing. But it's done as a village. So we don't know any of these. A lot of the people in our samples were not going to psychologists. They were going to their local priests or rabbis or shamans. And I think interdisciplinary work, as we learn to work with others in various communities to make healing accessible, not just from the silo of psychologists. And I think we found a lot of partners as we collaborated with other disciplines and other generations. And I hope we're able to continue to do that and makes access really bigger for more people.
Thank you so much. You give me a hope with what you said. I have one last question for each of you. I'd like to know how you feel that we're still seeing the effects of the pandemic today. What has radically changed, and how will our world forever be different? I'm curious to see. I feel like Ilene, you have a very positive. You view things through a very positive lens, which makes me very happy. Although we know the realities of it, but I'd like to get your take on that from all three of you.
I'll be quick because I'm about to say something not positive, which is, as you've been reading about San Francisco, the downtown is deteriorating. Big stores have left, the big hotels are leaving, WeWork is leaving. What are we doing with the abandoned? So much of the downtowns, the homeless on the street, the drug epidemics, nobody's been able to solve those. So there are so many problems after COVID shifted everything from the way we shop, the way we've talked about, the way we do therapy. I mean, we're trying, but the good thing is that I realize is the interconnection of all of us. The fact that we enjoyed that the world got quieter for a little bit. The air quality cleared up, fewer cars on the road. We were forced to walk in nature and be with our partners and stay home more. And I think we learned to slow down a little bit. And there's certain things I think that we can learn from what COVID forced us to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we're also seeing, though, real difficulty for many people who have been struggling with a huge amount of anxiety and not knowing how to deal with that anxiety. People who didn't go out of their homes for 3 years. I have friends who were terrified and still are. And I just saw it this last couple of days even though I live in Florida, I'm planning a trip to New York City in a few weeks, and the air quality in New York City has been horrible, all over the news about how bad it is, and people are back wearing masks because they're terrified that the air quality is going to affect their lungs. We still know very little about long COVID, about people who have experienced COVID and still have many areas of damage. We have families that have been had huge difficulties in my own family, where some people refuse to vaccinate, whereas others say they won't come if you don't have vaccinations. So that's been a real source of difficulty in families that hasn't quite healed. And I'm not sure it's going to be able to be healed in any positive way, because it's really shown the dividedness of how people believe in science and people who don't believe in science. And who influences the public? How do you influence? We used to think scientific facts are facts, but we know that a good half of our population don't see it that way. So these are issues that I think we have to continue to grapple with, especially those of us who are attached to academia, because we now have people coming into academia, politicians, I won't mention names, but politicians, you know where I live, politicians who are coming in thinking they know how to do academia better and educate people better. And they're gonna not do it with bias. Instead of, as scientists, we say everybody knows there's bias. The goal is to find it and deal with it. So it's just different ways of looking at the world, and it's going to take time for us to learn how to get along with one another when we see the world so differently.
I'll just jump in real quickly. Global warming, no one's talked about it. I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but that's a huge thing. We're now recognizing it. I don't know why it took so long, but the other is nurses in hospitals, folks. I mean, this is continues to be a huge problem, and it's not being solved yet. And huge numbers of people are leaving the profession of nursing. It's horrible. My mother was a nurse, and I know about nurses, and this is the worst time I've ever seen for nurses. So among the things that I worry about, those are some of them. But in terms of our book, I feel very good about that. I mean, we were able to capture the essence of what 2 to 3 years of work looks like in these various work groups. And I'm very proud of us. I'm proud of our collection of authors, and what a wonderful, wonderful job they did. Now we just need to get the book from the publisher. We have to visit them and grab it from them, but we're hoping it will be out in this month. That's allegedly the possibility, but we'll see.
And I think we're going to have a big celebration for psychologists who might be at the American Psychological Association convention in August.
Yes.
We're planning a big celebration there as well.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us, audience as well, for spending your evening with us. And I've absolutely enjoyed listening, to all three of you. And I can't wait to read this book. So hopefully it'll be allegedly out. It'll be out soon. But we definitely want to continue the conversation. it seems like there's so many different connected conversations right now in terms of mental health and the, long lasting impact of the pandemic. So of course, this book and this, your study and your work is so very important right now. So thank you again. This will be available via replay if anyone is interested. And we look forward to gathering again, hopefully where we have the book in hand, right?
Right.
Thank you so much. We're going to say good night.
Good night.
Thank
Night.
you. Bye-bye.